This episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by webhealer.net. Webhealer are the go-to provider of websites for private practitioners in the UK. Established for over 20 years, Webhealer offers a non-technical and fully supported service to help therapists grow their private practice. Just one customer from your website each year pays for their services. Go to webhealer.net and use coupon code CT100 for their £100 off their Do It For Me service.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
I'm exceptionally well. Thank you very much for asking, Rory. And Rory and I both hope that you are well. You're joining us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's episode 240. And we've got three topics we're going to be delving in today, starting off with our theory in practice, where we take a little bit of theory and we look at how that comes alive when it comes into practice. And today we're going to be speaking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a really, really interesting and very important piece of key theory. We then go on to practice partner, where we recognize that many of us either go into private practice as our full-time work, or maybe we run private practice to supplement income, and that can be a lonely journey. And today we're going to be discussing setting up a private practice, and we're following on from last episode 239, where we started speaking about directory listings, and we're going to be doing part 2 of directory listings today, how to write those directory listings in such a way that it gets people engaged in who you are and what you are offering. And then finally, for episode 240, we end with practice matters, where we take an element of something that we may come across in our practice. Maybe that is a presentation. And today, Rory, you interviewed Amy Launder, a very good friend of Counselling Tutor who's done many lectures in our CPD library, speaking about something that I think we see more often than we would like to, and that is supporting clients with body dysmorphia and negative body image. I think that crops up from time to time in practice, so it's definitely something to stay tuned for. But kicking us off, Rory, we start with the theory to practice of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Indeed, Ken. And I think this is a wonderful piece of theory. I don't think there's anybody who's ever studied counselling or psychology who's never come across the work of Abraham Maslow. But I think, sadly, he's sometimes a little misunderstood and sometimes a little dismissed. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist who in the 1940s developed and, in fact, was the cornerstone of humanistic psychology. He worked alongside Carl Rogers at a distance. They were never colleagues, but they thought the same. And one of the key aspects of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that humans had free will. This was quite a departure from, the psychoanalytical school of therapy, where people were thought to be governed by their subconscious processes and driven by the subconscious, and a massive depart from the behaviorist school of psychology and therapy, if you like, where people were conditioned to think in a way. This was that humans had free will, and it did actually form part of something called the human potential movement in the 60s, about how much potential a human being has. And to illustrate that human potential, Maslow developed what was called his hierarchy of needs. It's an equilateral triangle, a triangle with equal sides. And within that sides, there is like an elevator of different needs. So right at the base of the pyramid, at the thick end, he talks about survival needs, the physiological needs, the ability to be able to breathe and to drink and to eat and to use the bathroom. And then he moved up to the next level, which was safety needs, ability to be safe, have housing and feel secure in the world. And then he moved up to love and belonging, having friends, feeling that you're connected to something, being known in the world. And then that led to esteem, feeling that you're, a person in the world. You're an okay person. You're connected to the world. And then finally, self-actualization, where you could be literally anything you wanted to do. And one of the interesting things about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that he studied very highly motivated people. He studied Einstein, for instance, and he noticed that those people who were really successful and were really motivated to make changes in their lives and indeed in others, were self-actualized. That's the basis of the theory, and a lot of people think it stops there. But actually, Maslow went on to have a bigger career in management, in managing people and the development of how you manage people, HR, in other words. He took that theory into HR, and he had a bigger career in human resources than he did in psychology. But it still remains a key base of theory that is taught, throughout psychology and counselling.
It is indeed. And I know on our YouTube channel, it's one of the most searched for terms is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think that is because, as you've quite rightly said, Rory, it spills out of counselling, out of psychotherapy, even outside of psychology into business, where business HR managers would look at hierarchy of needs. And it's worth getting a grip of the theory. But of course, this is about theory and practice and how we see a theory that we might learn from a textbook, or as Rory has beautifully explained there, the theory of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How do we see that presented within our therapy room? What might we see in a client, or what might we see in ourselves, and recognizing ourselves for our own personal development? And I want to share a story, Rory. I've had a recent trip from the UK. I went back to South Africa. I lived in South Africa for many, many years. And South Africa is a country that is I guess, quite prone to crime. So there are high walls in the area that I was staying, which is Gauteng, or was previously known as Johannesburg. High population, and all of the walls are high. All of the walls will have some form of electric fencing at the top. Most houses will have some kind of an electronic gate, so you don't have to get out of your vehicle when entering your home because of the risk of hijacking or being robbed or mugged during that process. Most of the houses have some form of an alarm that is linked to an armed response unit that will come around if a panic button is pushed, and they come with guns out, basically. And it's a different feeling to what I left in the UK, which is very calm, very tranquil. We leave our car open, we leave our home open from times. We live in North Wales. And I found myself focused on my safety and on my security when I was in South Africa. So I went right down the hierarchy of needs, down to that base, second to having my basic needs, which is food, water, being able to breathe, go to the bathroom, as you said, Rory, which is those biological needs which form the very base. But I found that I was right there in that security. I was always aware of it because I'm not used to it. I guess that's the reason for it. But it's interesting how relationships and other interests fall right down to the base of the triangle when you find yourself in that situation. I guess that's what the theory tells us, that no matter where you find yourself on that triangle, if one of the steps below you gets taken away, you fall directly below to that. And I guess a good example would be, if you wanted to test that, is hold your breath and don't breathe, and see how quickly that becomes very important to you. And you'll go right down the triangle to that very bottom of the basic needs of needing to breathe.
Absolutely, Ken. And it's a really interesting theory. I used to teach this, as we both, Ken and myself, did when we taught together. We used to say to students, what is the most important thing you need here and now? And a lot of people would say, water. Water's the most important thing. And I'd say, well, you don't have to think about that, because you could live a lot longer without water than you can without air. So, breathing is the most important, then probably water. And the thing is that within this hierarchy of needs, there are things that are not swappable. You cannot swap water for air. You need air, and then you need water. And I think how we apply this, this is theory in practice. And I think how we apply it, as Ken said, if you meet someone who's really struggling, maybe paying the bills, maybe struggling to make ends meet, they're not going to be able, with few exceptions, and I think it's important to put the few exceptions in, be able to progress their lives. If you cannot eat and pay your bill and heat your home, very topical thing of our times, then how can you do anything else? How can you, develop yourself? How can you, maybe go to university or college? For our children, even school, I grew up in the 70s, and I can remember children who basically didn't eat at home, and they didn't achieve very well at school because their focus was on trying to get enough food to survive. So it still remains a very topical and very important piece of theory when we meet people to try and understand where they are, because as therapists, we meet the client where they are, not where they hope to be or where we hope they're going to be. We meet them where they are in their circumstances. And if their circumstances are diminished, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very good kind of calculator, if you like, or a reference to understand where people are. It's a very, very useful piece of theory. And one of the things I'd like to say about the theory is that a lot of people think of Maslow's as a triangle where you go up literally in an elevator. You hit this level and this level and this level and this level. But actually, towards the end of his life, Maslow changed his mind, and he said that the needs that we have may be flexible at different times in our life. But it's a mightily resilient piece of theory, Ken. It seems to have stood the test of time.
Oh, definitely. And we see it playing out in our therapy rooms all the time. And this is what this section is about. What are we going to see? How do we work with that? So I'm going to put in some examples. The first example I'm going to put in is maybe somebody who has recently lost their partner. So they might present for work with around the grief and the loss or the bereavement of somebody that was very dear to them. But we would check how they are, and we would check their personal circumstances, as you've just covered, Rory. If they're unable to pay their bills, unable to put food in their cupboard, then that's going to be their primary focus before we can start working on grief. Because we're going to keep getting pulled down that hierarchy of needs. That needs to be sorted before the person is able to work through their grief. They need to be able to eat. They need to be able to be heated and to be able to live their lives, to be able to have, I guess, Rory, the luxury of grieving and of thinking about that. And that's something for us to be aware of. As a therapist, we might be going, no, we need to focus on the grief, but we need to, like you say, Rory, meet the client where they are. And that's basic needs. It's right at the bottom of the triangle. The second one is security. And, security can mean many things. I shared my trip to South Africa and what that was like. But security can also be, does the person feel safe to be able to speak to you? So your counseling room, is it set up in a way that people can't see in a window and see who's there, that maybe people can't see who might be entering therapy, can't be overheard from another room or another office? Because if the client comes in and they don't feel that they can speak freely and securely, that confidentiality may be compromised, well, that's the security. And they're unlikely to share if they feel conscious about that security. So I guess that's maybe another area, Rory, where we might see that theory really presenting itself in our practice.
Absolutely, Ken. I couldn't agree more. And I think another area that we're going to be seeing more and more is belonging and love needs. Yeah. We live in a very diverse society now where people identify in many different ways and look for belonging within their identification. And I think if somebody is neurodiverse or someone is from the LGBTQ plus community and they don't feel connected, or they feel there's no one like them, and this goes obviously for diverse communities in terms of race, skin color, sexuality, neurodiversity, the whole panoply of diversity, they don't feel that they are part of the society they live in, be that the school or the workplace or their hometown, then that links so strongly into belonging needs, feeling like you belong. And I think I can speak for myself, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening out there who have felt that sometimes they don't really belong. They could be in a workplace, they could be in a family situation, they could even be, in an education system, and they just don't feel that they belong. They're not recognized. They're not seen as who they are. And I think, in therapy, that's what we try to do. We try to see the client for who they are, their uniqueness, their, the spirit of the kind of spirit of who they are. And that links so strongly into this theory, I think, Ken.
It does, Rory. I'm seeing it there, that being recognized, having some kind of a social acceptance for who you are and your place within the world. I mean, it's right there at level number 3 in that hierarchy of needs. And a person will be pulled there when they feel that is not being met. And I think we only need to look to a recent global event, COVID, which basically isolated so many people, where all of those support systems and friends and relatives, you couldn't see them except online. And online is not in person. It is different. I mean, I guess it's nice to be able to see somebody online, but in person, there is something truly special and human to human contact about that. And we saw that became the talk. Everybody was talking about how isolated they were, how they were not able to do their usual things and mix with their usual groups. And there is a great indication, an example, as it were, of how theory relates to practice. That's hierarchy of needs, where as soon as that need is not met, it becomes what we talk about. It becomes our primary focus. I think it's an interesting bit of theory. I think it's worth looking at, revisiting if you haven't looked at it. And we've got a handout for you. It's one of Rory's super duper handouts on the hierarchy of needs. And to get that, you just go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our website. Very top, you can click on the podcast tab. Go to episode 240, that's today's episode, and right there on that page you'll find the show notes for today's episode with links of the topics that Rory and I speak about, but you'll also find Rory's super duper handout on the hierarchy of needs from right within that page. You can download it, it is free, hold it in your hand, look at it, see the triangle itself, and think about how that relates. If a client is coming in and presenting it on a certain topic again and again, is it maybe that they are at that level in the hierarchy of needs, Rory?
Absolutely, Ken. And why don't you discuss it in your training class? I think it's an interesting topic to discuss, in your training class, or if you've got a training WhatsApp group, have a chat about it and see how that theory links, because it's also very useful for assignments. But as Ken said, it still remains a very pertinent theory to those who are studying counselling and psychotherapy.
Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. And as we kind of reverse out of theory to practice, maybe a challenge is to look at how the hierarchy of needs applies to you in your life. Do you find yourself mapped to that hierarchy of needs, depending on where you find yourself and what stages of your life you're at? So there's some personal development there as well. So there it is. That is our theory and practice session. And we now move swiftly on to practice partner, where we look at an element of going into private practice. And in last episode 239, Rory and I covered directory listings. So listing yourself in a directory, either with your ethical body or a private directory. We spoke about the AIDA model of gaining attention. We spoke about the importance of your picture, and we gave some great tips on picture. If you haven't listened to that, go and explore episode 239. But today we actually wanted to carry on with that to the actual writing of your listing. The words that you put down, I think, Rory, are vital. They're really important.
Absolutely, Ken. And this is a question that gets asked time and time again in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, knock on the door. Our friendly moderation team will let you in, and you can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people studying in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. Maybe they're qualified therapists who are in private practice, and there's a good selection of tutors and supervisors all talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And this writing headlines and how do I advertise myself and how do I get clients comes up time and time again. And you're absolutely right, Ken. Writing a good headline is absolutely so important. And sure as you're going to tell us, Ken, it's really important you get the tone right and make sure who you're writing it for.
Yeah. And I think a great place to start is having a think about the frame of reference of somebody that might be looking at your listing. So we would surmise that this is going to be a client or a potential client for yourself that is experiencing some form of difficulty within their life, and they're now taking those steps to reach out and find somebody. And maybe they've clicked on a listing site, on a directory site for looking for help, and perhaps they've been scrolling through that and your picture stood out, and now they're looking to see what is your headline. So if you think about how a directory listing site works, and go and have a look at any of them, you'll notice that you will have short snippets of all the different therapists that are representing themselves there. So what do you have to gain that attention, which we covered last time in the AIDA model? The attention, we're going to get it from our picture, and we discussed that last time, but we're also going to get it from the very first words that potential client may read. And if you think about it from their frame of reference, how can you recognize where they're at and potentially start a conversation with them? So if we were to say something like, I am a qualified therapist with over 25 years of experience, and I hold a master's degree. Now, my question is that about me, talking about me, or is that talking about them? Is that recognizing them as the client? And I think, for me, that's talking about me. Now, that client may very well be interested in my qualifications and my proficiency levels of my studies and what I've done, but they're only going to be interested in that if I capture their attention first. So I think your headline, the very first words that you write on your listing, if they are focused on the client, and it might be something like, if you are experiencing difficulty and looking for somebody to speak to, I'd love to hear from you. Now, that's very different. That's warm, that's inviting, and it's recognizing where they're at. If you are experiencing challenge or difficulty, you're looking for someone to speak to, then I would love to speak to you. I think that is more engaging for me, Rory.
Absolutely. And, people are not looking for huge amounts of qualifications. Generally speaking, people are looking for an answer to their issue. So, for instance, later on today I have a dental appointment, and my dentist advertised, would you like a more confident smile? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. Everybody wants to be confident when they smile, and showing your teeth is part of that, I guess. So they're talking to people who may want some dental work done, may want some cosmetic dental work done. They may also say, don't suffer in pain with your teeth. Don't suffer with, and that, someone's got a toothache. You go, that's the person for me. They can help me with that. So it comes down always to, what can I do for you? If you go into a shop, old-fashioned shopkeeper would say, what can I do for you today? What can I do for you? And that's the messaging you should have. What help is somebody looking for? And how can you say that you could offer that help in a warm, engaging, and to be honest, genuine way? Yeah,
definitely. And that headline gives you that opportunity to do that. And this may be counterintuitive, what I'm going to share next. And what I'm going to suggest is, if you have a special area that you've trained in, you can niche down and put that in your headline. Now, you may think, well, so for example, if you are struggling with grief and looking for someone to speak to, I would love to hear from you. Now, that's very specific. And there may be that thinking of, well, you know, I don't just work with grief, I work with other things as well. And maybe the person's going to go past because maybe they're not looking for help with loss and bereavement. But by niching down, we become a specialist for the people who are looking for that. And there is some evidence that seems to suggest that the deeper we niche, the more successful we will be. So it kind of does eliminate a number of people, but it also becomes very attractive for the person who is looking exactly for that. So an example of that, if you were looking on a tooth directory, Rory, for your tooth directory, a dental directory, let's say you have a toothache, and you're looking on a dental directory, you might see general dentist, but if you might come across to, are you in pain? We offer emergency consultations for immediate relief. Now, you're going to be more drawn if you are in pain to that. So it's an idea to think about. If you do have a specialist area or niche, can you bring that into your headline? You know, I work with children and young people, for example, or whatever it may be. Or I'm also a supervisor. Maybe you're listing on a supervision directory. I'm a supervisor who specializes in working with practitioners who practice online. You know, by niching down, you can make yourself stand out. And if you look at the AIDA model again, it's all about that standing out, being distinguished as being different. So there we go. There's a little bit about headlines. And of course, you might lead with a headline that might be enticing, something like, I offer the first session for free, or something like that. How do you gain the intention so that the person looks and starts reading more about who you are? We would hope that the headline and the picture might prompt the person to click on your on your listing and then start reading. And we're now going to go into, what do we put in the body of our listing, Rory? What are we going to talk about?
Well, I think that we talk about the person who we wish to see.
Yeah.
And you know, if we were advertising executives sat with red braces and red glasses on, Ken, we may refer to that as the avatar. And an avatar is really who your customer is, knowing who your client is. What sort of client do you want to see? And Ken's touched on that. Maybe you've done a lot of research in bereavement, or maybe you've done a lot of training in child therapy. So you would think about who your client is and what you want to say to them, and you would write your listing to address them as if you had met them. You know, maybe face to face or in the street. You may say, you know, you may be struggling with bereavement and loss and have nowhere to turn. You know, I offer a warm space to help you work through those feelings and look at the difficulties that bereavement can bring. That's just off the top of my head. But what you're saying is you've got a difficulty. I can help you with that difficulty, and this is what I can offer.
So
and
powerful.
That mightily enticing. My dentist advertises, we're talking about teeth. My dentist advertises, I work with nervous. Are you a nervous patient? Are you not going to the dentist because you're nervous? We specialize in working with nervous patients. And that's what enticed me to go to the dentist, because I happen to be quite a nervous patient when it comes to the work of dentistry. And it's very, very attractive. So have a think. What your client might be asking for.
Yes.
And then just address it. Just sit down and just think of the client you want to work with, sat opposite you and they telling you what their issue is, and you addressing that. You say, I can work with that. Name the issue, or name what you do and how you work with it. You know, how you can. And the niches are huge, aren't they? You talked about bereavement. There's neurodiversity. There's ethnicity. There is, you know, working with certain, ex-military, veterans, the police. There are huge amounts of areas that suit specialist work, I think, and a specialist approach.
It's so powerful when you make a connection, and a directory listing is not you broadcasting out to a potential client who you are and what you do. It's more the start of a conversation. It's a conversation started by the client. They start the conversation by visiting the directory. They continue the conversation by reading your headline and clicking on who you are. So you have that headline that's going to introduce that you understand where they may be at. They're going to click on that, and now a conversation starts. And the last thing we want to do in a conversation is start speaking about ourselves right from the very beginning. You know, it's polite within a conversation that we may say, how are you? Where do you find yourself at? So we can understand the person, and the same is true in a directory listing. So what we wouldn't want is the beginning of your directory listing. After the headline, they click on for you to say, I studied in this and I've done this, and this is my CPD, and this is my level of qualification, and here's all of my memberships to all of my ethical bodies. That is important. But that is important a little bit further down in our listing. We might start off by saying, I know it's difficult when you're going through a challenge, even to just start looking for somebody. I celebrate and salute the fact that you've taken that step, and I would love to speak with you if you feel it's appropriate. Look at the difference in that. I'm not saying I am this and I am that. I'm saying you are. I'm looking at you, the client. So we're continuing that conversation. Then, of course, we can layer in who we are, who we work with, how we work with people, our qualifications. And the qualifications, interestingly enough, they lead so many listings. And in my opinion, those qualifications should be a little bit further down in the last third of the listing. And the reason for that is we want to form a relationship before the person needs to know that we're qualified. Well, they need to know we're qualified, and we need to be qualified before we're on the site anyway. So there is a presumption that we are qualified. But think about taking those qualifications and your studies and all the CPD that you might have been doing to reassure the person that you are the right person for them to be working with after they've made the connection, after you've kind of reached out. And then I think one last thing, Rory, what is really, really important is the call to action. It's called a CTA in marketing, or a call to action. And a call to action takes place in any kind of marketing. You know, if the person goes into the supermarket and doesn't pick up the tins of beans that have been advertised on the television, then the advert hasn't done its job. And the advert will say, you got to try these beans. That's their call to action. Go and buy them and try them. That's their call to action. There's no difference. In our copy, that's what it's called, the words that we write on our listing, the call to action would be something soft and inviting, like, I would welcome for you to reach out by email or telephone and contact me. We can have a free session to have a chat with where you are. So what are we doing there? We're saying what they need to do. Reach out by email or telephone, or whatever your preferred method is, or however the directory works. It might be click on the contact me button, however it works for you. But putting in and saying it, making it clear, letting the person know what they need to do to continue the conversation.
Absolutely. And if this sounds awfully commercial and awfully businesslike, the fact of the matter is that people who are looking for services want to engage with someone who cares about what they do, has a passion for what they do, and more to the point, is interested in you. And the way that you transmit that is doing exactly what we've discussed by writing copy that shows who you are and what you offer. And if you think of the things you buy in your life, you know, we all purchase services and goods every single day of our lives. And I think what's interesting, when I've made a large buying decision, I've always gone for someone who strikes a relationship, who looks like they care, they're interested in me as a person, not someone who just says, I can do this, you know, I can do that. I'm a gardener, I can garden things. I want someone who says, I can make your garden look beautiful. You may want a different form of garden. So I think it's really, really important that, you know, you take that on. I know I had, as a therapist, when I first went into private practice, I had a bit of a resistance towards this. Didn't think it was genuine or real. But the more I thought about it, I thought about it from the person who was wanting the services. They want to know, they don't want to waste their time. They want to go to someone who they feel they can trust. And the way to do that is by writing a directory listing, which shows that you're interested in them.
Yeah. Keep in mind, it's a conversation. You're starting a conversation with whoever your ideal client is. You're addressing them in a warm and welcoming way. You then, of course, tell them about your service. You invite them to get in contact with you. That's your call to action. So a couple of tips. Once you've written out your listing, read it back, read it aloud. And because sometimes things read differently with the eyes to they do when we read them aloud. Read it aloud and say, is that my voice? Is that the voice that I want to speak to my potential new client with? Is that what I want them to hear as they kind of meet me for the very first time? And adjust it depending on how that voice comes across. So there's some thoughts for you. Here's some takeaways. This is now going back to this episode and, of course, the previous episode. Number one, get a good picture. It will encourage people to look at your profile. It will stop people as they're scrolling through, stand out and be seen. It's really important. It's the A of AIDA. It's that gaining attention. If they just scroll past you, then you might as well not be on that listing there. Secondly, the headline. It needs to be engaging. It needs to encourage the person to want to know more. It needs to be written from the client's frame of reference as opposed to our frame of reference. And if you do have an area or specialism or niche that you work in, maybe there is an opportunity to introduce that if you feel that that is appropriate. Then the writing, write empathically, write as if it is a conversation rather than a statement or a CV, which can come across cold and clinical. Be as warm as you are in your practice and do that with your words and read that back to kind of feel how that feels for you. And then share that with a colleague. Ask for feedback. Ask what they think. And of course, Rory's already mentioned the Counselling Tutor Facebook group. Tens of thousands in that group. Go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor. That's a place where you can say, hey, you know what? I'm busy writing my directory listing. I was thinking of using this paragraph. What do you think? And you're going to get some feedback. You can either take that on or not, but at least it gives you some input external to yourself. And remember, this is your listing, your practice. It's you. You're putting a part of you over. So make it you. Make it, own it, and be proud of what you're putting out there. It's almost in the directory. We're offering a handout. We're saying, here is my hand. Take my hand if it is appropriate to you as the client. And remember, always have a call to action. Always tell the client, the potential client, what they need to do to get hold of you. Sometimes we can presume, they're going to know that they need to go to the top of the page and click on the Get in Contact button. But maybe that's their first time on that site. Maybe they don't know the layout or what they should click on or where they should go. So tell them in words, to get in contact with me, because I would love to hear from you. All you need to do is, and that's the call to action. And hopefully that is interesting for you. I think that's a good thing to cover, Rory. It is covered in Facebook a lot. That's your directory listing from picture right through to the wording that you might use. We'd love to hear your comments and feedback in our Facebook group on that. And I can share with you, excitingly, next week in Practice Partner, we're going to be looking at websites. And that is a monster topic. And we've got a special guest, an expert from our sponsor, webhealer.net, that is going to be coming in. Rory, you've done the interview already. It's coming next week, this interview. It's over 30 minutes of absolute value-packed information. So do not miss next episode.
Absolutely. If you're thinking of a website, thinking of commissioning a website to show what you do and start that conversation that Ken has rightly stated, then there's no better way than having a website. But it is a very complex task to get a website that really works for you. And we've got an expert coming in who's built websites, knows websites inside and out. And I've interviewed him, and I have to tell you, it's absolutely not to be missed, because he shares vast amounts of really useful information on website development. So please visit us in the next episode.
Well, there you have it. So moving now on to Practice Matters, where we take an element of what we may come across in our practice. And I think this is a vital topic. It's a topic that every single one of us should look into. So you're going to get great CPD just from listening to this. It's Amy Launder, who is a regular contributor to Counselling Tutor. She's one of our lecturers. She lectures often in our CPD library. And this basically is an interview based on a lecture that Amy did do for the CPD library. If you remember, you can log in and listen to that. And it's about supporting clients with body dysmorphia and negative body image, Rory.
Absolutely. And as you say, it is a topic and a presentation of our times. It's something that therapists are engaging with more and more. Amy's done a fabulous lecture for our counsellor CPD library called Supporting Clients with Body Dysmorphia and Body Image Difficulties. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say about it.
Practice Matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
And I'm joined again by, I have to say, one of our favourite presenters. Our audience, our people in the CPD library love your lectures. Amy Launder. Amy, you're so welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Now, again, yes, indeed. Now, and Amy's produced, I think, a very timely lecture on body dysmorphia. It's something we hear a lot about in the press, a lot about on the TV and the radio. But I think from a therapist's perspective, it's really important that we get a real understanding of how it presents and how we may work with it. So I guess my first question, Amy, is what is body dysmorphia?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think a lot of us therapists and people in general use the term body dysmorphia quite fluidly, I guess, whereas actually it is a diagnosable condition. So, there are people who have body image issues, and then there are people who have body dysmorphia. So body dysmorphia is where there is a perceived flaw in the body. So it might be something real that other people can see, or it might be something completely imagined that we've kind of blown out of proportion, maybe in our heads. And the person will go to quite extreme lengths to try and fix it. So a lot of plastic surgery or hiding indoors, agoraphobia and things like that. Or just to kind of try and distract people away from it. So it might be a lot of makeup, covering up with certain clothes and things like that, avoiding certain situations like going to the beach or the swimming pool, because they don't want that perceived flaw to be seen by other people.
Yes, and I think you pick up on an interesting point. There is a difference, I think I'm hearing you say, between someone who may just become a little bit obsessed with a blemish or something that's something that they don't perceive as right with their body, but someone who becomes unwell with that. Would that be a description? I'm guessing what I'm after is, how would a therapist be able to tell if someone has had body dysmorphia, as opposed to just a little bit uncomfortable with the body part?
Yeah, so I think I would say it depends how far the client is going in order to hide or cover up or try and fix the perceived flaw. So again, it might be multiple plastic surgery that the person is then still never happy because the flaw a lot of the times was never there in the first place, and so plastic surgery can't really fix an imagined flaw. Or even things like burning themselves, or cutting their hair off, or trying to using self-harm as a way to try and cut the flaw out of their body even. So can be quite extreme behaviors, even up to suicidal behaviors and things like that. So I think if there's any doubt, trying to get to the client to head to the GP or to a psychiatrist for a diagnosis. But there can be a lot of blurred lines between someone who's extremely unhappy with their body image and someone who has body dysmorphia.
I mean, I think you make some interesting points there, and I think one that I've just picked up already is a way of making an assessment as a therapist may be that if somebody is going to extreme lengths such as cutting or disfiguring in a way to remove the perceived blemish or imperfection, then it may be useful to signpost them to a doctor, and this doctor may signpost them to a psychiatrist. But I guess in the meantime, how would we work with someone like that? How would we be able to support them as therapists?
Yeah, so the main treatment, as with a lot of these things, is CBT, because it's with body dysmorphia, it is questioning thoughts that may not be true, questioning beliefs that may be irrational and things like that in the client. So a lot of CBT techniques can often be quite helpful. But even in someone who's not CBT trained, what we can do is get the client to start questioning, where did this come from? When did this start for me? What was going on at the time that I first started having these thoughts? So a lot of the times it might be that they were bullied for the way that they look or something like that, or some kind of trauma that happened. So questioning kind of whose voice is it that's telling you in your head that, you know, there is this flaw, that you're ugly, that you're this, that you're that. Whose voice is it? Can you argue back against it? All of those kinds of things. So kind of really exploring with the client where it all came from. But again, with all of these explorations and challenges, not to go too hard, because what can then happen in the client's mind is that the body dysmorphic part of their mind will start arguing back against the client and will convince the client of all the reasons that they are disfigured or disformed or anything like that. So it's all kind of gentle explorations with the client as opposed to against the client.
Yes, and I think again another good point to consider, that a lot of body dysmorphia, like a lot of issues that clients present with, are usually what we're usually seeing is the presenting past, where the past is presenting in the here and now. But in the case of body dysmorphia, it's presenting in a specific way. So the message, I think, is go gently, be curious, and not push too hard, because that's a pretty strong voice inside someone who may disfigure themselves or do serious self-harm in the service of trying to become perfect. Is that what it is? Perfect?
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of people who have body dysmorphia, as well as, or maybe instead of becoming perfect, it's just trying to blend in, because they're in their minds, often they are monsters, or they are, hideously ugly, and people are looking at them and judging them. And so all they probably really want is to just blend in with the crowd and not be special in any kind of way. There's a really good documentary, I think it might be linked under the lecture that I delivered on BBC, called, it's a really horrible name, I think it's called Ugly Me, My Life with BDD, or Body Dysmorphic Disorder. And it follows this young girl who gets a diagnosis in the program she gets a diagnosis of body dysmorphia, and she goes to some CBT sessions, and it's all filmed, and it's very interesting kind of seeing how much it affects her life and the types of things they talk about in the sessions. But mainly the thing is how strong, like you said, the beliefs are and how deep they go. And so even as it's even hard for her to kind of accept that she has a diagnosis of body dysmorphic disorder, as opposed to just being ugly, which is what her belief has always been. So it's such it really gets deep into someone, and it's really difficult for anyone else, for the therapist or partner or friends, to convince them otherwise.
Yes, and I think it's like any other belief system. It's a lot easier, I think, to change perceptions than beliefs. And once something becomes a belief system, then that can be mightily hard for both the therapist and the client to make a change, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're talking about using CBT techniques. I wonder, how effective is therapy for BDD? I mean, is there any statistics or research that would show that, a successful therapy may negate the effects of how someone sees themselves?
Off the top of my head, I don't have any statistics, unfortunately, for the effectiveness of therapy. I do know that from the research, CBT is kind of thought of as the best way forward alongside medication. So that's why going to the GP can be really important, because SSRIs have been shown to be effective. So I think it might be, in my opinion, a kind of combination thing, as with a lot of these things. So some form of therapy, whether it's just talking therapy or CBT, alongside some medication, I think is probably the way forward.
Yeah, so when we talk about SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, I think that's the name. We really talk about is antidepressant medication, usually antidepressant medication. So I guess what I'm hearing is it's a mix. It can sometimes be a mixed economy helping your clients. It may be therapy, it may be seeing a doctor, it may be medication. So would you say, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, that if you're working with someone with BDD, it may be that there may be other professionals that get involved or may need to get involved in terms of referring?
Yeah, I think it can always be helpful with someone who has a clinical diagnosis like this, to have more people involved and to build out a support system for the person. And for example, in the documentary I mentioned, her partner ends up going to some of the therapy sessions with her, so that the therapy or the techniques the therapist is working on with her are extended into her personal life, and the boyfriend is no longer colluding with her and trying to convince her that she's not just ugly. He's doing all the same things that the therapist is then doing. So it's a hybrid of all different people that need to be involved in a treatment like this.
I think that's really interesting, the idea that at some level the partners and caregivers can be pseudo therapists to reinforce the reality, if you like, for the client can't see, and to support them outside therapy sessions. I think it's really interesting. BDD, when I started practicing 20 years ago, maybe it wasn't a diagnosis, but maybe people didn't speak about it as much. But I'm wondering, is it something that's relatively new in terms of people using mobile phones, the selfie generation, of which I have to say I consider myself, I take the odd selfie occasionally. Is it generated by the society we live in, do you think? I mean, what do you reckon?
I mean, I think it's definitely, in my opinion, perpetuated a lot by social media and by media in general. I think with all the photoshopped images that we see of celebrities, but also of other people now, it's so easy to use filters and to use Photoshop on your phone and things like that we see all these kind of perfected images of other people and even of ourselves, and then our real life selves don't compare to what we're posting online, and so we then become very unhappy. I think that with the way that we look, and I think that can definitely contribute to body image issues, and whether it then kind of tips over into body dysmorphic disorder, it depends on the person, I think.
I think it's really, really fascinating, and certainly the clients I've worked with who presented with body issues, it has been very much about reality checking, the fact that the images that you see on the images you see on the media, even video now, it can be manipulated to make anybody look like anything, and it is not real. But I understand for people who suffer or are in the grasp of this, it must be really difficult. For people watching this lecture, which, just to remind people, is available in our CPD library, what do you hope that therapists will take away from your lecture?
Yeah, I think just the seriousness of it, kind of that it's not just feeling unhappy with their body, that it can actually lead up to suicidal behaviour and suicide attempts because of how unhappy the person is with how they look and how socially isolated they become, and all of these things that come out of the body dysmorphic disorder. So I guess to not minimize it and to take it seriously when it does present, and to try and get the client to see a GP or a psychiatrist or something for some extra support.
I think that is a really, really good summary. And as we've heard from the interview, it seems to be like a mixed economy. For someone who's really struggling, it may need other professionals and indeed supportive family members to get involved to help. And as always, Amy Launder, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you, as always, to Amy Launder. And of course to you, Rory. You reach out, you find our lecturers, you speak to our lecturers, you support them in putting lectures together for our CPD library. And of course, if you are a member of our CPD library, log in. You can access Amy Launder's lecture there on body dysmorphia and working with negative body image. If you're not a member of the Counsellor CPD library, just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information of how to join is right there. What I can share with you is to join the Counsellor CPD library costs less than 1 cup of coffee out at something like Costa or Starbucks or your local coffee shop per month. It really is great value for money and great CPD. Everything is certified. You get your certificates, and we cover the topics that you guys ask us to cover. Sorry, I should say. I'm talking about coffee again, Rory. I can't keep away from the coffee. This has been Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 240.
Yes, and we started off with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a cornerstone of humanistic psychology and a theory that has stood really the test of time. In Practice Partner, we talked about getting the best from your directory listings and starting that conversation with potential clients. And also we looked at how you niche down and maybe offer specialist services to clients who want a specialist approach. And then finally, in Practice Matters, I caught up with Amy Launder, one of our lecturers, who spoke about supporting clients with body dysmorphia and body image difficulties. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.